The Lost Princess, Chapter 18, GAIA. You're completely sure that this is necessary? David stood in front of the collapsed dome. It was a military base, used to be, anyhow. Though it didn't quite look like any military base he'd ever seen, and David certainly had seen his fair share of those. The structure wasn't exactly a dome, per se, rather a large rotunda propped up by pillars that looked they had been ripped out from under the roof of the Parthenon. Every entrance had been rendered impassable by the bombings, and it was David that asked the question as he mounted a launcher on his shoulder, aiming down the viewfinder towards the heaps of rubble surrounding the base. The launcher was heavy. It was by far the largest weapon he'd ever had the displeasure of carrying. After a rather quick scan of the premises, GAIA determined that a well-placed launcher blast could penetrate the collapsed walls of the military base. For this to work, however, they needed a launcher. The bounty hunter's ship possessed such a weapon. With the aid of the morning sun and having already walked the route, the trek back to the ship proved to be quicker than their journey to the military base. Ryla went with him, but the two shared few words. Perhaps it was better that way. She was hiding something for sure. He'd become quite adept in determining her various moods, but he had every reason in the galaxy not to involve himself further in her life than he already had. Right, hauling the launcher all the way back to the base proved a challenge. The thing was heavy, and its odd form made it difficult to transport. Despite leaving in the early morning, it wasn't until nearly noon that the two returned to the remains of the base. By that time, Katerna had already prepared to head out and search for the two, but such plans ultimately proved to be unnecessary. David struggled to align the center of the viewfinder with a red smear on the marble wall, the sweet spot, as GAIA had put it after analyzing the structure and the destructive power of the launcher. If the energy bolt struck near that smear, the relevant portion of the wall would be blown open while the structure itself would continue to hold. A miss could result in the complete collapse of the rest of the structure. Far from ideal, he swallowed. He glanced at each of the four Ravinians. Mavarna, taking cover behind a mound of rubble. Jinsep was beside her, peering over the rubble and watching the collapsed rotunda with eagerness. Katerna was on the opposite side of the square, shielding herself by hiding behind a round marble planter, inside which was a scorched tree. Ryla hid behind a similar planter, and, after all this time, GAIA still hadn't answered his initial question. GAIA? Ah, yes. How may I be of use, Commander? Came the hasty reply. Was that drowsiness? Well, being attentive would be a start. My apologies, Commander. I've been quite lost in thought. The rest of the group were looking at him strangely now. GAIA, you're absolutely certain that there's no other way of reaching the vehicles inside the dome? David asked. I don't want to blow up our only ticket out of this place. Again, Commander, my visual scans have been thorough and the three-dimensional model I've managed to compile appears sound. Short of somehow climbing over the rubble, which could prove especially difficult if not outright impossible when taking our dear princess' broken arm into account. Blasting a hole through this specific section will be the quickest and most effective way of getting inside. David let out a heavy breath. Well, here goes nothing, I guess. Never have more inspiring words been uttered, Commander. Shut up. The center of the viewfinder aligned with the smear. David thumbed the sensor. The launcher whined for a moment. Its barrel grew brighter and brighter. Finally, a bolt of pure blue energy exploded from the launcher, sending the weapon lurching backwards and plowing a hole straight through the wall. Bits of debris and rubble were sent flying across the square. David felt a few small chunks rain down on him as he set the weapon down. Four more eager faces popped into view, eagerly waiting for the massive cloud of dust to settle. The smoke cleared, and a massive opening in the wall of the collapsed dome became plainly visible. He could see the ship inside, sitting silently. It was shaped like a pill bug, its engines were dormant and its body had been left virtually untouched by the bombing. This stood in sharp contrast with the other dozen or so vehicles inside, almost all of which had been completely crushed by falling debris. The light poured through the open roof and the ship's metallic finish gleamed. It was almost as if it had been waiting for them. Damn, David. Where you said USE from? Jinsep muttered blankly, slowly standing up. Mavarna grabbed her supplies and sprinted towards the aircraft, haphazardly dodging the fresh bits of smoking marble and chunks of debris scattered across the plaza. Ryla threw her hands up into the air and beamed excitedly. You did it. Katerna simply smiled and slowly started towards the ship, Job well done, Commander. GIA remarked. Somehow, David could tell she too was smiling. General Qatarij pored over his dashboard leisurely. A holographic array of graphs, maps, fleet formations, and other particulars surrounded him. Information, data, intelligence, he may be a general, and an effective one at that, but he was still an analyst at his heart. He grabbed a fruit from the grass bowl beside him and bit into it. He delicately licked the excess juices from his lips and made sure to get all the pulpy fibers out from between his teeth. An averania, an exotic delicacy plucked right off the trees that forested the planet Kignoa. Sweet, yes, but a touch too sour and a bit more firm than he'd like. It was good enough for now. The Anamorphia, which roughly translates to From Love and Blood, was the capital ship of the entire Ravinian navy. Despite this designation, however, at a glance, the vessel bore a closer resemblance to a luxury cruise ship. The capital ship possessed no offensive weapons, only a robust set of defensive turrets, relying instead on the rest of the impressive capital fleet. The interior of the ship also proved to prefer form over function. The floors and walls were made of a smooth, hardy wood and refreshing steam rose from carefully disguised vents. The lighting was warm and homey and potted planets sat idly in off-traveled hallways and corners. The general took another bite from the fruit before setting it aside. A notification appeared on the holographic display, the latest casualty estimates from Kaltaka. An honest shame. He had been there once in his youth, he believed it to be among the kingdom's most gorgeous towns. The doors to his office slid open. His secretary appeared in the open doorway. General, the visitor has arrived. Ah. Yes. The Argmenan negotiator. Not merely the negotiator either, as she was also widely recognized as the one true mother, the highest title in Argmenan society, a smart woman, and a uniquely adept one. She successfully defended her band from the clutches of the previous king and his father, both of whom pursued the Argemen to the furthest ends of the kingdom. There were reasons for caution, naturally, but since the revolt and Killiar's ascendancy, relations between the two sides have been quite placid, yet the general, in all his years spent under the previous king, never found the opportunity to better familiarize himself with the curious woman. She had messaged the navy just yesterday, informing them of her imminent arrival. Apparently, she had something important to say. The general swiped away his dashboard and nodded. Bring her here. The secretary bowed swiftly before exiting the room. The one true mother appeared shortly afterwards, flanked by two of her most loyal guards. She was shorter than he had expected, if they were to stand directly adjacent to each other. The top of her head would barely reach his shoulder. She wore no ornate gowns or sashes. In fact, she looked quite ordinary. After quickly familiarizing herself with her surroundings, the woman took a seat in front of him. She hadn't even the cadence to ask for permission, as much as a formality as such an action may be. General Qatarij? She asked. That is I. The general affirmed. He leaned back slightly. I am Sal Kutaka, the true mother of the Argeman and ruler of Argmana. She announced. Her accent was thick and her voice was deeper than one might reasonably suspect. Her posture was peculiar, she sat perfectly upright and seemed to hold her chin at a certain angle. In my time, I've heard quite a deal about you. The general began. You're an impressive young woman, there are but a few of us who can possibly hope to rival your achievements. Although I must confess my suspicions. The message that we received from your people's diplomatic center was surprising, to say the least. He continued. The king has hoped to foster a strong and lasting relationship between our two realms. He, and I, by extension, had anticipated that our first meeting would occur under more elegant circumstances, perhaps in the halls of the royal palace itself. But alas, we are here. So what do you wish to impart upon me? The woman hardly moved nor blinked as she spoke. I assume you have heard of Lien Bosun's betrayal of the lost princess? The general let out a breath. He blindly thumbed new fruit. His eyes narrowed. Yes, I have. But that information, as I'm sure you're well aware, is classified. Our network has its ways. Sal alluded to ominously. My people learned of the princess' location far before Bosun decided to turn herself in. I sent several of my men to capture her on Scalata. Our intention was to submit her to the king, and then embark on our first official negotiations. The general leaned back again. But, of course, that didn't happen. No. Sal admitted, a twinge of defeat in her tone. She broke character for but an instant, casting a crestfallen glance towards the floor. She immediately corrected her expression. We were also unable to identify exactly where on Scalata the princess and her ilk had sought refuge. Soon, our luck began to change for the better. She continued. Weeks after we lost contact with our first crew, we managed to track down our lost ship's signature. We tailed them to Barmanara station, where we attempted to retake possession of the vehicle. We were able to confirm the presence of Princess Ryla and her aide, Katerna Et Tal. But you were unable to apprehend them. The general concluded. We are aware of all of this. Our interrogation of Lien Bosun has been thorough. Sal chewed her lip for a moment. I'm sure you're aware then that the kingdom has no way of tracking our ships. Only we have such an ability. That is how they managed to so easily evade your navy, even though it seems that there's a warship for every molecule of this sector. We have been tracking their ship ever since they left Barmanara station and headed for Marlala. You know the location of this ship? The general asked, curiously. That we do. The woman answered. We lost contact with the ship only a few days ago. If you take another look through your battle logs, I'm sure you'll find a recent incident in which an unidentified civilian ship sped towards Marlala and released several countermeasures. That was our ship. We believe that our stolen ship landed somewhere in Calcutta district. Sal said. We believe the lost princess and her aide to be there, alive and well. We saw no indication of a catastrophic collision. So, what is your offer? The general asked. A woman of your intelligence knows that you will gain nothing from aiding us out of the kindness of your heart. A deal. She answered. We locate and retrieve the princess and her allies. In return, as much as I admire your eye for strategy, Sal, the general interrupted. I have no reason to believe that you can make good on your promise. You have attempted to capture the princess and her compatriots twice now. And both attempts resulted in failure. A fire blazed in the true mother's eyes. The crews I dispatched earlier were simply foot soldiers. My men and women are of elite skill and dedication. They will not fail. I will go so far as to oversee the operation personally. In addition, we will be able to work quickly and more effectively than your army. And time is of the essence here. You have not yet cleared the planet of its anti-air weaponry that will forestall any invasion or attempted landing of troops, however big or small. Our ships will be able to land with minimal attention. I believe the princess has grown a great deal in her absence. No longer is she the brain-dead partygoer that the tabloids and news agencies believed her to be. She's gained a sense of duty. She feels obligated to help her people. Whether she's right or wrong is irrelevant. If you delay, or are delayed, for too long a period, then I believe she may be able to reignite a resistance movement. This movement would not be confined solely to this ruined world, but would extend far beyond, to dormant cells across the galaxy that despise the new king and have been waiting for a real reason to act. The general scratched his chin. So, say we agree to this plan of yours. What do you want in return? The woman fell silent for a moment. An uncharacteristic smile crawled across her face. We want the alien.